Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? We had to do a little last minute change of my audio settings for some reason. So confirming that. Excellent. All right. I've got the all clear. Well, thank you so much to My Image, My Choice, Reclaim Coalition, and the Joyful Heart Foundation for organizing today and tomorrow's historic virtual summit on deepfake abuse. It's absolutely an honor to be with you today and to share a bit of the work we've been doing as an administration to support survivors of tech-facilitated gender-based violence, and in particular, to address the unique dimensions of image-based sexual abuse, both AI-generated and authentic. My name is Cailin Crockett, and I serve as a senior advisor to the White House Gender Policy Council and dual-hatted with the National Security Council. In this lightning talk, I'm going to focus on how we have partnered with, listened to, and in so many ways been led by the expertise, resilience, and grit of survivors and civil society advocates. Being survivor-centered has long been a commitment from the president himself, who originally authored the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, in 1994, with the help of survivors and frontline advocates. And as technology has evolved, so too must our response to gender-based violence. And so under the Biden-Harris administration, preventing and addressing online harassment and abuse has been a top priority, one that cuts across our domestic and foreign policies. And as this group knows all too well, while the digital world holds immense potential for amplifying the voices of women and girls and LGBTQI+ people, far too often that potential is undermined by online harassment and abuse. The scale, reach, and amplification of tech platforms have exacerbated the scourge of gender-based violence, and it's been affecting not only individual survivors, but also stability, security, and democracy. From doxing to targeted disinformation campaigns to deepfake, non-consensual intimate images, all of these threaten women's participation and leadership, which in turn undermines democracy. And at a time when democracy is under attack under the world, we can't let online harms that impede women and girls' participation in all facets of society go unchecked. And so because online harassment and abuse is borderless, resolving this 21st century challenge has required collaboration across countries and sectors. So to that end, at the first Summit for Democracy in 2021, the Biden-Harris administration pledged to form the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse alongside other nations. Formally established at the 66th Commission on the Status of Women in 2022, the Global Partnership has grown to 14 countries that together have committed to prioritize, understand, prevent, and address the growing impacts of tech-facilitated gender-based violence, including image-based sexual abuse. And in fact, one of our country partners at Korea, the Korea Cyber Standards Commission, I know is contributing to this conference. So there are partnerships across the world that we've really built together. So since its launch, the Biden-Harris administration, together with our partners across the world, have built a global coalition of stakeholders from governments, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector to accelerate progress towards safety and accountability for women and girls and LGBTQI+ people online, thereby promoting more resilient democracies and safer, holistic societies. And so what I want to emphasize to you all is that from the beginning of the Global Partnership, we've committed to rooting our work in survivors' lived experiences and expertise. Notable lived experience experts, including Maria Ressa, Zilay Van Dam, and Rana Ayub, to name a few, have been on the advisory group for the Global Partnership, informing our priorities and providing feedback. But complementing this global effort, in June 2022, President Biden established the White House Task Force to address online harassment and abuse, with a mandate to develop concrete actions for federal agencies to prevent and address online harms and their intersectional gendered impacts. We have partnered with survivors and civil society every step of the way, starting with the launch of the task force, which featured a panel of expert survivors and leaders, including Matthew Herrick, Harry Goldberg, and Marianne Franks, who set the tone for the work of the task force and outlined what is at stake. Nothing short of public safety and democracy as we know it, in addition to the devastating effects on individuals that must be addressed and remedied. Throughout the work of the task force, we've heard from hundreds of stakeholders: survivors, advocates, parents, educators, law enforcement, medical and legal professionals, and researchers who share the significant harms of online harassment and abuse. With these consultations over the past year and a half, the Gender Policy Council, in coordination with the 12 federal departments and agencies that comprise the task force, has been developing a comprehensive whole of government blueprint to address online harassment and abuse, which we will publish in full this spring. Now, in March of last year, the task force issued an executive summary with a snapshot of some preliminary actions that agencies are undertaking, from new research to grant programs and implementation of the reauthorization of VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which includes for the first time a federal civil penalty for the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. I'd like to preview some of the efforts that will be highlighted in the full task force blueprint, because these in particular stem directly from our consultations with survivors and civil society. These consultations include powerful survivor testimonies from a diverse constituency of youth, college students, public figures, social media influencers representing intersecting identities across race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and identity, demonstrating the widespread reach of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And the survivors that the task force consulted participated in several roundtables held by the task force to inform recommendations and areas of policy attention. And I want to note that one of the roundtables on youth survivors and young people impacted by online harassment and abuse included Taylor, who is the subject and survivor of the documentary Another Body that has been in so many ways a catalyst for action for all of us and for the summit today. Each of these survivor leaders shared their experiences facing major barriers when seeking assistance or support from law enforcement, their schools, colleagues and peers, the courts, or from the tech platforms that had been weaponized for harm. And we've listened. These consultations, and I want to emphasize particularly those with survivors, they haven't been performative. They have driven concrete results. For example, one of the top unmet needs we heard from survivors was that they needed a trusted, safe place to turn to for support for image-based abuse. And in September of this past year, so just a few months ago, the Justice Department Office for Victims of Crime awarded a grant to the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative to fully establish their hotline as 24/7. Creating the first federally funded national helpline for survivors of image-based abuse. And the Justice Department has also recently awarded the Sanar Institute a grant for its Reclaim project, which will offer direct services to survivors of image-based abuse, and also offer capacity building, training, and education on the unique aspects and considerations of image-based abuse for mainstream domestic and sexual violence victim advocates. Survivors, and particularly those who had experienced image-based abuse, also spoke of the burden and the re-traumatization of constantly having to, quote unquote, prove that they had experienced sexual violence. And in particular, they've cited challenges in being heard by law enforcement and other legal systems professionals. And to address this concern, in the fall, the DOJ Office on Violence Against Women awarded $1 million to Equitas and its program, the Stalking Prevention and Awareness Resource Center, for the brand new Prosecution and Investigation of Online Abuse Initiatives, which will support the provision of training and technical assistance to law enforcement and prosecution agencies to advance their capacity to investigate and prosecute online crimes and harms, such as cyberstalking, online harassment, doxing, and the threat or sharing of intimate images. And I know that my colleague, Jennifer Long, who leads Equitas and is a leader in this work, is also playing a role in the conference today, as well as colleagues from the Sun Art Institute. So it's just really so exciting and inspiring to see the partners that we've been working with and listening to have some of their work finally recognized and resourced by the US federal government. And I want to note as well that we're continuing to evaluate the best policy solutions and legal remedies for incident image abuse. And not just sticking with federal action, we're really engaging state leaders here. And so last April, the White House, to that effect, convened a bipartisan state legislative convening, bringing together 16 different state legislative members, from representatives to state senates, legal experts, and survivors, to strengthen protections for survivors of non-consensually distributed intimate images and explore civil and criminal pathways and best practices learned from experience in implementing state laws to hold offenders accountable. Now I just want to say that our work to address online harassment and abuse, but particularly image-based abuse, has also continued to evolve and respond to the rapid advancements of new and emerging technology and its impact on survivors. Before the eruption of ChatGPT captured widespread public attention on the risks of AI, the Biden-Harris administration has been tracking how AI has posed serious risks and harms for survivors of online harassment and abuse, thanks to the leadership and advocacy of the many survivors we've met. And so last October, President Biden issued an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. Consistent with the president's longstanding commitment to ending gender-based violence, the executive order directs key actions to prevent and address AI-generated image-based sexual abuse. And survivors of this harm, including many involved in the planning of today's summit, were invited and stood beside us at the signing ceremony for that executive order in recognition of their key role in this administration's policy approach towards AI. The AIEO does several items to address deepfake sexual abuse, but I want to highlight in particular how it is going to be issuing through our Department of Commerce first ever report that invites companies, civil society, and other stakeholders to identify innovative and best practices for safeguarding AI systems from generating abuse material. It will also direct the Office of Management and Budget to consider the risks of deepfake image-based sexual abuse of adults and children in forthcoming AI procurement guidance, because we really want to insist that when the federal government makes business decisions on which AI vendors to purchase and deploy, that we are considering best in practice safeguarding approaches to reducing the risks that they would be misused for abuse. I want to just also note that AI-generated content generally and the need for governments to do their due diligence in labeling government-produced content, as well as working with industry to promote labeling and watermarking to demarcate whether or not an image is synthetic or manipulated, is a necessary but of course insufficient way to address in particular the disproportionate targeting of women political leaders. And to that end, I'm excited to share that next week I will be traveling to Nairobi, Kenya, to attend first ever Gender Disinformation Summit that is hosted by the Global Partnership alongside the governments of the UK and Kenya to bring together experts and civil society researchers and women leaders to inform a model response and playbook for disrupting and countering gender disinformation in the context of electoral processes. This tool will provide governments with a response framework for coordinated, evidence-informed action to prevent, disrupt, and reduce the spread of targeted online campaigns against women political and public figures and human rights defenders. Integrated throughout the conference agenda, we're hearing from survivors, women leaders, human rights defenders, and journalists who've been the targets of deepfake abuse and online violence to inform that policy product. So in closing, I hope I've conveyed that across domestic and global policy priorities, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to championing and learning from survivor voices. Since the outset of the administration, we've been grateful to civil society networks like the Reclaim Coalition who forged a community of survivors to champion policy interventions that truly center survivors' experiences. With their input, with your input, this administration has been able to craft timely, informed, and comprehensive strategies to combat image-based abuse and all forms of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And we'll keep going. Thank you so very much for your time and consideration, and wishing you a best of luck with the rest of this wonderful conference.